Oh, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. My name is Karl Teffer from the International Training Center of the ILO here, located in Turin, Italy, and I would like to welcome our audience and our experts from across the globe to this learning webinar on business, non-discrimination, and gender equality in times of COVID-19. We received over 600 registrations for this webinar. And already I would like to thank each and every one of you for your effort and for your time of being here with us, and also for the questions that you already shared with us. This was really helpful in shaping the content of this webinar. This webinar is part of a series of webinars which the ILO and UN Women within the framework of We Empower program is implementing on promoting gender equality at work and women's economic empowerment within G7 countries. It's a technical cooperation program which is funded by the European Union. The aim of these webinars is to assist employers, workers, and their organizations to develop and implement the gender-responsive workplace policies and practices which are in line with international labor standards. This is even more relevant as we are facing an unprecedented health crisis, which quickly is turning into an economic and labor market crisis, undermining the jobs and livelihoods of hundreds of millions of. ILO released its new monitoring report on COVID-19 and the world of work, and currently it is estimated that we have a decrease of 10.5% in terms of global working hours, or in other words, over 300 million jobs that have been lost as we are speaking. Unfortunately, women in particular are disproportionately affected by the COVID crisis in several ways. If you look at the general sectoral analysis, which is now on the screen, we can see first that sectors which have a high female participation, such as arts, entertainment and recreation, or food services, are severely negatively impacted by the crisis and are coloring deep red. But women are also impacted by their role in the frontline sectors, which are part of the response to the COVID crisis, which we're doing, such as in the health sector or in the educational sectors. These are also sectors where women are risking their health and safety. Thirdly, women are being negatively affected, and if we can go back to the slide on the sectoral analysis, the previous slide, women are also negatively impacted by the unpaid care economy. As you all know, schools have been closed, children out of school. It's almost 800 million children that are at home, and the burden most likely will fall upon the shoulders of women worldwide, not even to speak about the heightened care that elderly people need or people that are suffering from illness. And finally, the COVID-19 crisis is making worse inequalities and discriminatory practices which were already present before the start of the crisis. Women in holding insecure jobs, women in the informal economy, and of course the topic which we are listening a lot about, gender-based violence. Such underscore even more the need for government, for workers, and businesses to renew their commitment and focus on women's economic empowerment. And these policies should be part of the core of our response to this crisis and our recovery strategy. And in this regard, the ILO, through its tools and resources that we have available, we can assist business in this regard. The ILO at this moment already has a framework for COVID-19 policy responses. And if we can go to the next slide, please, Francesca. This is the framework for policy response in terms of COVID-19, which provide guidance to social partners and businesses that are considering to implement policy responses to these crises. This policy framework is based upon international labor standards, and as you can see in pillar number 3, preventing discrimination and exclusion of workers is part and parcel of Pillar 3. Huh? So today in this webinar, we will learn more about the guidance that ILO has available in terms of workplace policies and practices to keep them free from gender-based discrimination while responding to the current COVID-19 crisis. So what is on the agenda today? You can go. The webinar will approximately last 1 hour and a half and will consist of an expert-led panel followed by a more interactive peer learning session. We will start today by a learning session about the ILO Help Desk for Business, which will be presented by Emily Sims. Emily Sims is the coordinator of this ILO Help Desk. We will then listen to two practitioners, two people representing companies that are champions in terms of diversity on the workplace. We will have Maria Brask from Nova Nordisk and Silvia from Bending Spoons. In terms of questions and answers, of course, we invite you. We are with a lot of participants, but nevertheless, we would like to listen to your questions and answers. The next slide, please, Francesca. So you are invited on the chat box that you can see, you can submit your questions and your answers there. And once all the three presentations have been done by Maria, Silvia, and Emily, we will pick out a few questions. Please also, when you decide to leave this webinar, there will pop up a feedback for this webinar, and your feedback is very important for us. So also please take that in consideration. The last 30 minutes will be about, we invited Benedetta Magri. She's the program manager of International Labor Standards, Rights in Work and Gender Equality here at the ILO Training Center. And she will present to us a newly developed self-assessment tool, which was developed and is nearing conclusion. And we already would like to give you a teaser on that one. And that will be the last 30 minutes of this webinar. So as you can see, we have a very packed agenda. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Emily Sims, coordinator of the ILO Help Desk for Business on International Labor Standards, and she is speaking to us from Geneva. Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carl. I'm so happy to be here with you today, everyone, and I'm grateful for your participation. And I'm looking very much forward to our discussion. And I hope you'll have a lot of good questions and observations, because I love to have an interactive session, even virtually. So let's get started. Next slide, please. Okay, my presentation is briefly going to cover the principles of international labor standards and what general guidance companies can take from it. And we're going to talk along the way also about special considerations during COVID-19 pandemic and how they might apply. And just touch briefly at the end on the ILO Help Desk for Business and how it might be able to help you as a resource. Next slide. Okay, because I like it. No, because I like you guys to be thinking and interacting with me as much as possible. We're going to start off with 4 quiz questions. Here's our first one. We're going to read the question, and then I'm going to give you about a minute to vote, and then we'll unpack each of the questions. So the first question: which, if any, of the following job announcements could amount to gender discrimination? Must be single and available for extensive travel, must be over 45 years of age, must have at least 5 years of experience, and or must have a bachelor's degree. Okay, so we're going to see the results now. Okay, so a lot of people thought the first one was discriminatory, a few the second, 3, C and D, no votes for that one. Well, let's unpack. So must be single and available for extensive travel. That component, this is a question that came into the help desk that had 2 parts to it. First of all, the single part, marital status has nothing to do with anything. That's clearly a grounds for discrimination. In particular, it's often women who are married who are required to leave the workforce. So that clearly is discriminatory. The second component, available for extensive travel, that may or may not have intention to be discriminatory, but it may be discriminatory in practice. People who are not available for extensive travel are people with family responsibilities, who could be both women and men, but are typically disproportionately women. It may be, though, that indeed you must be able to travel for this job and there's no getting around it. Fine, then it's not discrimination. However, you need to look very closely at whether the burden of travel can be distributed amongst more colleagues, so it's not unduly burdening one person who, because of family responsibilities, cannot travel. Or if things like virtual meetings, which we're all getting very accustomed to, could be used to replace some of that travel to reduce the burden. Because even if it's not intending to discriminate, it will likely have a disproportionate impact on discouraging women from applying for the job. The second one must be over 45 years of age. On the face of it, it doesn't look necessarily like gender discrimination. It might be age discrimination, but not gender discrimination. This is actually a fairly common ad. And what it's doing is filtering out women of childbearing age, which is why the person must be over 45 years of age. So in the absence of a clear justification for the age, the person is likely trying to screen out women. Must have at least 5 years of experience. Well, again, on the face of it, this doesn't look discriminatory, and it may be very legitimate reasons why you need someone with more years of experience. But the problem with this ad is it doesn't specify what type of experience. And one of the challenges of setting a minimum threshold of experience is that it often discriminates against women who have borne children and stayed home for a period of time to take care of the young children and are coming back into the workforce. They don't meet the threshold of 5 years of experience for the particular job that's being advertised. Actually, 5 years is not required. It's simply a somewhat lazy way of HRD filtering the potential applicants so they're not inundated with a lot of applicants. It's understandable, but it often adversely discriminates against women, even if unintended. A bachelor's degree used to have sort of the same effect when women were very much the minority of university degree holders. Now they actually are a slight majority, so it's not necessarily any longer the case. But there is an exception to that. You will find patterns of poorer families, first-generation immigrant families, families with limited resources. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes they actually hoard those resources to pay for the boys to go to university and not the girls. And so some pockets in your community, even if women are equally represented at university, may be underrepresented at university. And again, asking yourself, if you're not specifying what it's in, if you need a civil engineer with a civil engineering degree, okay. But if you need a salesperson, maybe a bachelor's degree is not really relevant. And so that young woman who didn't have the chance to go to university because the money went to her brothers could be discriminated against. So the lesson there is that whenever you're setting criteria for job announcements, for job specifications, it's really important to have in mind what exactly you're trying to achieve and to look for unintended consequences. Next question. A company wants to recruit an employee for an occupation requiring physical strength. This occupation cannot be adapted. As a consequence, the company doesn't receive candidatures from women. Is this discrimination? Yes, no, or it depends. Okay, let's see the results of this one. So there were a fair number yes, about even yes, even no, or sorry, even yes, even it depends, and no answer. Well, the answer is it depends. It could be that it truly, I should back up. This is an actual question, and the company was concerned about both women not applying and people with disabilities and what they referred to as people of size. And it may indeed be that the job cannot be adapted. This company is not ex ante assuming that women cannot do this job. They're not saying, therefore, women need not apply, and they're indeed concerned women aren't applying. So their intention is not discriminatory. However, we encourage them to nonetheless look again at whether or not the occupation can be adapted. Because often, even when you think it can't be adapted, it can, and it is probably excluding a lot of women by virtue of not giving a really good attempt to adapt the job. But it's also important to revisit adaptation because this is an instance where it can be discrimination against men. The assumption that men are stronger and therefore they can handle carrying heavy loads all day long because they're strong. What's the big deal? They may be strong, or a woman may be strong and able to do the job as well, but that doesn't mean that's good for their body. And not thinking through the consequence of your policy on those workers, but assuming, hey, they're men, they can handle it, is in a way a form of discrimination as well. So we said, prima facie, it's not discrimination, but we would really, really encourage you to explore to the extent possible whether it can be adapted. Next question. Is it okay for a company to dismiss a pregnant worker if she has been let go for other reasons and her pregnancy was not known at the time? Yes, no, or it depends. Hmm. Okay, let's see the results of this one. We have, looks like a slight majority for the yeses and no answers, and a little bit less for no or it depends. This one is a little bit of a trick question. The answer is yes and no, and I'll explain. A company determining whether to dismiss a pregnant worker, as long as it is not because she is pregnant, but for another legitimate reason. Maybe she stole from the company. Maybe she refuses to do her work. Maybe she is posing a threat to another worker. If those are the reasons and not the fact that she is pregnant, the company can decide to dismiss her. But the burden of proof is on the company that they have a legitimate grounds that is not related to her pregnancy. However, they can
Emily, did your sound go away? We are not hearing you.
Sorry, I don't know why it just turned itself off. Can you hear me now? It's okay. The logic, so you can decide to dismiss a pregnant worker, but you cannot notify the woman while she is pregnant or on maternity leave. And the logic of that is that she needs to be able to defend herself. So if she's on leave, she cannot do that. She and her baby need to be in a relatively stress-free environment, so it is not good for either of them. It is the sort of thing that can wait until she comes back. So pregnancy is not a cloak that protects a woman magically from dismissal as a grounds for dismissal, but it does insulate the woman from the timing of the dismissal until after she's given birth and returned back to work. Okay, the next question, the last one, I believe. Businesses are suffering the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. To which extent, if any, of the following categories of workers could a company give priority for employment suspension, reduction, or termination? Women with young children, older workers, workers who have or might have COVID-19, or none of the above.
Non riesco a sistemarmi. Pronto? Sì, sono riuscita. Però non sempre sento. Ah, scusa.
Okay, so we had a small number of votes for women with young children or older workers, a little bit more for workers who have or might have COVID-19, and a lot for none or no answer. Well, the answer is none of the above, with one qualification. So any of these as a decision, you cannot just single out women with young children because you think they're better off at home or their husband will take care of them. You cannot single out older workers because they're more expensive or they're not very technologically savvy anyway and you need good opportunity to get rid of them. You cannot single out workers who are or might be ill because there are particular protections against dismissing people who are sick, at least for a limited period of time. So none of these categories should be a basis for selecting people to be dismissed or suspended. However, to the extent that these people who fit in these categories but happen to have selected for other criteria, then it's not discrimination because the basis was not one of these categories, but the other category. And I'll give you a very, very common example that's found in a lot of collective bargaining agreements. You may be familiar with the phrase last in, first out, which is one of a variety of criteria that are often set up in advance in case of the need to restructure to preserve the jobs of people who have been with the company longer. You can debate the merits of whether it's fair or not, but it is a common ground and it is collectively agreed between the management and the workers. To the extent that a woman with young children happens to be recently employed in the factory, or an older worker who recently came, etc., because their basis is applying a neutral criteria that they happen to fall into, it is not discrimination. Again, workers who are ill, they have certain protections similar to pregnant women who should not be dismissed while they're on pregnancy, maternity leave. Workers who are ill should not be dismissed while they're on medical leave. But given those provisos, that's the correct answer. So let's move on to talk about what discrimination is. It's any distinction, exclusion, or preference on a designated ground with the effect of excluding individuals or groups from enjoying opportunities and benefits arising out of employment or occupation. This comes from our Convention on Discrimination, number 111 from 1958. Let's unpack it a little bit. So a distinction, exclusion, or preference. So it could be we don't like those people, or we make assumptions because we make assumptions about them, or we like those people because we make assumptions about them. Either way, it's discriminatory because giving preference to a group is by definition not including other groups. I'll give you an example. I had a research project. It involved a cookie factory in the Philippines, and they were very proud of their strategy of hiring only women as line workers. It was a Muslim minority community, and they fairly argued that Muslim women had been historically excluded from the labor market, and this was a way of promoting gender equality. But when you were unpacking a little bit, they also talked about how they also don't talk back to the management. They do whatever they're told. They don't organize. They work in as long hours as we want, because the assumption was that they're also passive and docile and good workers in that sense as well. So it was problematic in that it was coming at this partly from preconceived notions of what women workers are like, but also implicitly what male workers are like. And in this case, there was a discrimination against men in that community. So let's go on to the other parts of the definition. Oops, oh, that's okay, we'll cover this. Okay, prohibited grounds. The ones you see on your left are the ones that were identified in that instrument I just quoted, Convention 111. Race, color, sex, religion, political opinion, national extraction, social origin. That's from 1958, as I said. And since then, we've evolved to realize there are also other grounds that should be prohibited basis for discrimination, including age, HIV/AIDS status and health status, disability, nationality, family responsibilities, sexual orientation, or trade unionism. Can you just type for me in the comments section any of these different grounds that you think have to do with gender equality? Just wait like 5 or 10 seconds, whatever comes to mind, just type it in. Okay, I got an all. All of them? Okay. Very good. Well, we'll start with the obvious ones of sex. That means male or female, and it can also include transgender people, but also people with family responsibilities, because they have particular challenges. Sometimes it's men because people don't realize that men have family responsibilities too, and they assume that they don't, and there aren't allowances made for them. But often it's because women, the family responsibilities fall disproportionately on women. And sexual orientation, because this is an example of people not conforming to the expectations of their gender, in this case, who they love and live with and marry, perhaps, and that is considered gender non-conforming and a basis of gender discrimination. But as people rightly pointed out, things about intersectionality, take for instance age. A young woman is often perceived far more negatively than a young man, especially for issues like promotion to maybe a junior supervisory role, or as she is getting older and maybe they don't want her to be the face of their sales force anymore because she's got too many wrinkles or whatever, that they don't give that same consideration or that same prejudice towards a man. There are lots of different examples, but the whole idea of intersectionality, as many of you already are clearly aware, is that having gender discrimination, and on top of that, having a disability and being discriminated against based on that, or on race, etc. It's not just adding, okay, I'm discriminated because I'm a woman, and I'm discriminated because I am of my national extraction. It has a compounding effect because there are all sorts of complicated assumptions that go into those people, go into people who face 2, 3, 4 burdens. And so the idea is that management needs to be aware, not just that people may fall into more than one basket of grounds of prohibited grounds of discrimination, but that there is a knock-on effect of facing more than one basis of discrimination, and gender cuts across all of those categories. It's the one that is truly transversal. Next slide. Okay, it's important for you to keep in mind that there are 2 types of discrimination. There's direct discrimination, which my guess is most of you participating in this session are already fully aware of and on top of. Those are the slightly more obvious things to spot. It's where you are either expressly limiting opportunities to members of a particular group. So an example here is looking for a female accountant aged 40 to 45 years. They only want women because they, for some reason, think men are not good accountants. I don't know why. But also, again, they're trying to limit their exposure to women of childbearing age, which is clearly discrimination. Or they're expressly excluding members of a certain group. This is an example from a Chinese job advertisement. There's been a lot of attention lately to gender discrimination and employment there. So they are specifically identifying that only men should apply. Next slide. Although those are important things to bear in mind, and you certainly shouldn't be doing any direct discrimination, what your gender discrimination and gender equality policies should really be attentive to are indirect discrimination forms, because those are the ones that often get overlooked because there is no evil intent behind them. It's more typically a lack of thought that is going into them. So here are 2 different types. The first is seemingly neutral situations or criteria that impact people differently. So this used to be, this must be at least 1.70 meters, used to be a very common requirement to be a police officer. And it had the effect of screening out the majority, in many countries, the vast majority of women, and in fact, also shorter men. It turns out how tall you are has little, if nothing, to do with whether or not you're a good police officer. And there are many great police officers who are far below 1.70 meters. And you don't see that anymore as a job criterion. but that had a disproportionate impact on women. The other form of indirect discrimination is when you have consistent application of standards, but they have a disproportionate negative impact on some groups. So a classic example of that is training will be provided in the evenings. What is the problem with that? It's, of course, people who have family responsibilities, typically disproportionately women, who cannot access that training. And training is just one example. It can be many other types of activities that are scheduled, or things that make assumptions about people's availability, their personality, their tendency to speak up or not, that can have a gendered component to it. Next slide. So when does it occur? Basically, it occurs across the entire life cycle of the relationship between the employer and the worker. Oops, it's a little bit frozen. There should be quite a long list. Oops. Okay, at least for my computer, it's coming slowly. So you'll see it's across all of these elements, from how they're recruited to how they're paid, what assignments they're given, how their performance is assessed, to what opportunities they get to advance, training, safety and health, and termination of employment. Is there anything on that list that strikes you as maybe odd? Feel free to type in the chat. Like, for instance, a lot of people ask me, why safety and health? Well, you can have gender discrimination in safety and health. And one of the classic, or two classic examples are personal protective equipment for a lot of workers is only provided at a standardized size, which is an average sized male. And so it doesn't necessarily fit adequately to fully protect a female who is wearing that personal protective equipment. But also, a woman may be of childbearing age or pregnant and may need special consideration for levels of exposure to radiation, to chemicals, to protect herself and her fetus in particular. So this is where having a gender-sensitive approach is important. Someone mentions hours of work and rest. Again, that's getting to the ability to balance work and life. Hours of work could also consider scheduling and not giving people advance notice about extended hours and mandatory overtime for the day. That would not allow them to take care of their commitments outside of that work. But also there's a sort of like non-discrimination in categories and intersectionality. There is a compounding effect. So for instance, I will give you an example from the ILO, because it's good to air our dirty laundry so that we can be an example of how we've learned our lessons. The governing body asked the office to show patterns of who was hired at what grade broken down by gender. And it turned out the ILO had a serious problem in hiring women and men of similar educational background and experience levels at very different starting levels and positions. We have a P1 to P5 grade before you hit senior management level. Men were more often recruited at a P3 level and women at a P1 level, which is a huge difference since there's only 5 steps at the P level. And that affected not only their initial wages, but how it carried on, but also what sort of promotion opportunities they were able to access more quickly, training opportunities, job assignments, etc. It had a huge knock-on effect on all these categories, except paid holidays and maternity protection, but a lot of the others were very interrelated. So thinking about how these issues relate to each other. Well, we're still working. Someone asked, was it before a gender perspective was adopted? Actually, it was before our gender perspective was fine-tuned, and it's still being fine-tuned because we still have problems. But we had a gender policy in place, but it didn't have adequate data behind it so that we can start to see patterns. And the example I gave you from the ILO is an example where any one manager is making a decision about how to grade that post and who to hire at that post. And so at the level of the manager, there isn't really a sense that they don't have a benchmark to be able to judge their own performance and whether there was latent discrimination there. And it's really up to HRD, the department as a whole, to ferret out, is there discrimination? And to start to see the patterns and say, aha, we've got a problem and we need to do more biasness training, and we need to unpack what's going on here and make sure that there are clear guidelines in place so you don't have this systematic problem that we were having. Next slide. Okay, sorry, I was reading a question. I'll get to the question in a moment. The last slide, a normative part, is about equal pay for work of equal value. I'm not going to go into detail on this because it's extremely complicated. I say that not to scare you, but to forewarn you. And the reason it's complicated is because of that phrase, work of equal value. It's not talking about people doing the same job in the same pay grade or the same post advertised, and whether they're paid the same amount of money. It's talking, although that is a problem in itself, but it's also getting at the fact that there is occupational sex segregation because of how young girls are taught from a very early age what jobs are appropriate for them to go into, and young boys are taught and encouraged to go into particular jobs. So it's not just a matter of comparing apples to apples and seeing if everyone's got the same number of bites. So that's why it's a little bit complicated. But having said that, the basic principles are that it refers to not just how much they're being paid, but their entire compensation package and remuneration. So other income and benefits, like whether they have access to a car, in particular a car that they're allowed to use for private use, or a phone, or they get a bonus at the end of the year, those kind of things. Whether it's directly or indirectly paid, or whether it's money or in kind, like for instance, a special retreat for certain staff at the end of the year where they can bring their families, but others aren't excluded, and it happens to be mainly men who are invited, etc. So you have to look across the whole compensation package and think not just in terms of money and income, but all sorts of other secondary benefits, such as mentoring access or access to senior management on a more collegial basis and things like that. Assessment based on work components, responsibilities, skills, effort, and working conditions and main results. In other words, what they add to the company and not just what is their job classification. So we have an entire guide on how you're able to compare apples and oranges and watermelons in a way that actually will help you unpack whether you have issues around pay inequality. Last question, and then we can maybe go to some of the questions posted. The last slide. Okay, so these are two slides that just briefly break down what your company can do to have a strong and systematic gender equality policy in the workplace. So first of all, make a strong commitment in your HR policies, in your codes of conduct, because I would encourage you very much to think not just about your workers, but workers who are sourcing to your company and your supply chains, and how you can support your partner companies to also have gender equality as part of their key values, and workplace responses to COVID-19. Language is important. So you notice I've been mentioning men and women workers. It can be kind of tedious, and I don't insist that you use it every single time, but it's important to say it and express it often and not just in a chapeau, because it's easy for people to forget and default to the stereotypical worker, which is typically a male. So have that gender inclusive language. Integrate gender considerations into daily operations, in your policies, in your buying practices, and crisis responses, and design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation activities. Next slide. Ensure all men and women workers are aware of the protections and requirements of the HR policies and code of conduct. In other words, you're going to need to build up a culture where this is internalized amongst your workforce as a whole. And the reason it's important that it's both men and women workers is because they both have responsibilities. And please don't assume it's just men who are biased against women. There are studies and studies and studies that show that women can be as biased or more biased than men against women. So it's really trying to get over those biases. Everyone, regardless of sex, has been raised and is internalized to help them unpack them and to know what's expected of them and know what their rights are as well. And I have in here, pay particular attention to subsidiaries. You may have seen a very interesting article recently from Bloomberg, and it was looking at multinationals from North America, from Europe, highly touted companies with very good gender inclusive policies, who really got caught out in Mexico, where advertisements in professional journals showed that there were huge biases, very explicit recruiting of only men or only women, and often when it was only women, the advertised salary was far lower than that for a man who would occupy the same post. It was really embarrassing. And I don't think it was bad faith on the part of headquarters as much as an assumption that, well, these are our values at headquarters. Obviously, they're going to be our headquarters around the world. As you probably already know, if you're HR people, working in multinationals, it can be a really big challenge to build up those uniform shared values. So it's particularly important to pay attention to subsidiaries. Collect gender disaggregated data. The maxim, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Oh my goodness, does that apply to gender? Because gender is an accumulation of individual decisions. And even though a particular circumstance, it might be justified at the moment or are thoughtless and unintentional, but as you see data accumulate and you see clear and undeniable patterns, it really helps in waking up management to say, yeah, we got to do something systematic about this issue. It can't just be, come on, everyone, be nicer to women. That's not a policy. It has to be backed up by data, and it has to be driven by data. Maintain gender-sensitive grievance procedures, both for the company and its supply chain. And by this, I mean gender-sensitive in the sense that it may be gender issues that are at the core of the grievance, or it may be that the grievance machinery needs to be gender-sensitive to encourage people who may be culturally conditioned as women to not speak up, to not be aggressive, to not complain, to know about and make use of the machinery. Okay, the last page, because our time is clearly very short. The Help Desk for Business, which I manage. It is a one-stop shop for information on the international labor standards and how they relate to companies. I manage it, but I am not the one answering the questions. It's a team of experts based on whatever issue you're raising. They put together their best knowledge based on their core competencies and expertise, and then I synthesize that and give it to you in simple and easy to understand language. It's free and confidential, and we reply almost invariably within 2 weeks, typically much shorter. Occasionally, something is a real challenge, so it takes longer, but I keep in touch with you to flag why that's happening. So it's hopefully responsive to your needs. It also has a website, and there you will find organized by topic, tools, training opportunities, questions and answers that are real questions from real companies, although scrubbed to protect them, their confidentiality, to protect their identity, but they're not made up questions. So you see what other companies are dealing with, and you can see the answers that have been given, and you can maybe learn in a sort of collective spirit. And there is a special section on COVID-19. I guess we will turn it back over to Carl, and these questions I'll look through, and perhaps as we get to the open segment, we'll go back to some of these questions. Thank you very much for your participation, and I look forward to our further exchange.
Thank you very much, Emily, for this practical introduction and breaking down the international labor standards, so the principles of international labor standards as they relate to gender and non-discrimination. Just to repeat also some of the questions and comments in the chat box. Yes, we will provide you with a recording of the webinar. We will make available also the slides that were presented now by Emily and that will be presented by the next presenters. And there is a gigantic amount of questions or follow-up questions that are coming. We, of course, will not be able to cover all the questions, but Emily, you can for sure flood Emily's email box at assistance@ilo.org, or maybe it is already a question that was asked in the past. You will see in ilo.org/business that there's already a selection of most frequent questions asked around this topic, but also many other topics. So Emily, thank you once again for this introduction to ILO work, guidance on non-discrimination. Let's now hand over to our colleagues from the private sector, and more in particular, Maria. Maria, thank you very much for being with us. Maria is a human rights compliance manager at the Danish company Novo Nordisk, and she's already working over a decade on human rights and labor rights of employees globally. Maria, the floor is yours, and once again, thank you very much for being with us.
Hello. My kids are waiting outside the door, so I'll try to go very briefly over my presentation. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about Novo Nordisk Labor Code of Conduct. I guess that's not my slide right there. There it was, yes. I've been working for the past eight years in Novo Nordisk as a global labor rights and compliance manager. I am globally responsible for ensuring that we all comply and follow Novo Nordisk Labor Code of Conduct. So where did it all start? It started with hard work and a lot of commitments. You can go to the next slide. In 2002, Novo Nordisk became a member of the UN Global Compact. The guiding principles were formed in 11. In 12, we did a global human rights gap assessment. And then from 2012 to 14, that's where I started this job in Novo Nordisk. I've been there for many years before. We did an assessment of our global labor standards. So that meant that we traveled around the world for 2 years and heard, what do you have to say about your standard here? And then we made sure that it was aligned with our human rights commitments. And that means that we naturally follow the guiding principles. And that means that we follow the ILO standards. So that was a lot of work, but it was all worth it. And today we have a global labor standard that describes our minimum standard of working conditions for Novo Nordisk employees in the workplace globally. In 2018, we asked our CEO, Lars Fruergaard, if he could make a video statement about our human rights commitment. We have had a human rights commitment for many years in writing, but we really wanted this also in a video statement. And in that connection, we actually moved all our human rights anchoring into our business ethics compliance office. And the reason for that is that they already have anti-bribery, corruption, and data protection there. So it was a really good system where we could link up to with our human rights due diligence. In 19 last year, I spent a whole year updating and ensuring that the Labor Code of Conduct was updated, and it made sure that we now can follow the new requirements we have set up for ourselves. So, next slide. Why do we have the Labor Code of Conduct in Novo Nordisk? Well, of course, we have our memberships and our commitments, and that means that we at Novo Nordisk, we want to respect human rights in accordance with the UN guiding principles. And we want to make sure we don't infringe on any human rights of others. And if that should occur or happen in any way, then we address it and we correct it immediately. And I don't have time to go over, next slide, the whole Novo Nordisk Labor Code of Conduct or our human rights commitment. So I made a link for all of you to view after this session. Below you can see the link to the Novo Nordisk Labor Code of Conduct. And it's very comprehensive, but I think it's worthwhile taking a look at after the session. And as mentioned, the objective, next slide, in the Novo Nordisk Labor Code of Conduct, it describes our minimum requirements regarding Novo Nordisk employees' human and labor rights at work. So that means that you can do better. Doesn't mean, but you can never fall below this standard. And it applies to all of our employees globally. Let me just mention, I probably didn't mention that we employ approximately 43,000 people globally, and we have visited all of them. So in general, the Labor Code of Conduct covers the following risks at work: working hours, living wage, privacy. We have the sections on equality, harassment, discrimination, forced labor, and so forth. But today we're talking about equality and non-discrimination. So I wanted to deep in a little bit deeper to that section on the next slide. I have highlighted a little bit from the Novo Nordisk Labor Code of Conduct. It's much more in detail when you look in the Labor Code of Conduct. But what's really important for us is that we have the standard in place and that we state that we offer equal treatment and opportunities for all of our employees and a working environment free from discrimination and harassment. That is very important. We don't just state it, we also live by it. So we make sure that this is applied to all stages of the employment, recruitment process, in our working conditions, remuneration, development, promotion, termination, and so forth and so forth. And Emily was just so kind to mention what equality means, gender, family, and all of those things. So I won't go more into depth with that. We follow the ILO standards, just so all of you know that that's where we got these great examples from. And next slide. Another thing that's very important for us when it comes to equality is also that we identify tasks which can be offered to disabled people. For example, in Denmark, in Novo Nordisk, we have had a project called Project Opportunity, where we actually have offered people with autism job in Novo Nordisk, and that has been a tremendous success. Highly skilled people. We have naturally worked with external providers, making sure that they're also comfortable when they come to work at Novo Nordisk. But you're always welcome to reach out to me if you want to learn more about this project. And then, of course, we make sure that all of our employees always receive the appropriate level of training. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, it's fine. I took out the part about living wage because that's like where Emily also mentioned that, of course, employees should receive equal remuneration for work of equal value. However, I just wanted to mention first and foremost, we make sure that all our employees earn a sufficient income in a standard working week. So before we start digging into the next level, we make sure that they receive appropriate wages first and foremost. Yes, and like Emily also said, if if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. So what do we do when it comes to monitoring? Well, Novo Nordisk with the Code of Conduct, we strive to prevent, mitigate, remedy, and always account for any adverse human rights impacts which we potentially may be involved with in our own operations. Something new from this year, as mentioned, we are now a part of our business ethics risk process. Before we did our own human rights due diligence, where we involved our global people and organization community, and that was quite a challenging task. And we have this great system in place already with anti-bribery and corruption and data protection. And then we decided to move the anchoring of human rights over to our business ethics compliance office, and then we could lean up against this great system that we have in place already. So I'm looking very much forward to see what will come out of this when we do the first assessment in the fall. But for the next slide, what we also have is we have our grievance mechanisms in place. And that means that a lot of our data we get from our annual workplace assessments, they reveal a lot. They're of course anonymous. Then we have our internal Novo Nordisk Way audits, which we call our facilitators. They also go out and interview people. They help mitigate and correct where there might be instances. Then we have our compliance hotline. We have our ombudsman function, where you can also reach out in case you have some of your rights infringed. And we take measures for all concerns that are reported. And these people I have close contact with, and I get high level, of course, always confidential anonymous information. So I know where we have high risk and where we can jump in and continuously make sure to improve. So, but I think the final slide is, 2 slides here is the ones that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about, is that, so because of what we have learned from facilitations, compliance hotline, for our human rights due diligence, we have been able to prioritize where are the risks the highest and what was our results in 2009. As mentioned, we are 43,000 people in Novo Nordisk, and we want to make sure that we offer a safe and healthy and inclusive and engaging working environment, and that all of our employees always have equal opportunities to realize the potential. That is very important for us. As mentioned, in 2019, we revitalized and reinforced the Global Labor Code of Conduct. We made sure that it's aligned now with the business ethics compliance framework, so we're ready for that as well. We managed to increase paid maternity leave from 12 to 14 weeks globally, and then also we introduced the right to paid paternity leave. We're working on this also as we speak. We want to make sure we continuously improve and we support the gender equality agenda and the diversity and inclusion. Then we also introduced life insurance for all employees globally, which I think is something that we can be really proud of, especially in this COVID time. Then also, as mentioned, before we can do the gender pay assessment, it's important that we make sure that we at a minimum pay a living wage. So we entered a 5-year living wage program with an external non-profit business network. We actually use externals quite a lot when we do this, because we want to make sure that the data we provide in our annual report is credible. Then we also do annual business ethics training, and as a new thing, human rights was included in this, and that means that people are now also trained globally in equality and non-discrimination, which is something I'm really excited about. If we go to the next slide, some of the other results we had in 2019, and which was primarily driven by our diversity and inclusion division, was that we found ourselves in a situation that the end of 18 and the end of 19, we still have a ratio of 60% men and 40% women in our leadership positions. So that has led Novo Nordisk to prepare a really, really ambitious diversity inclusion aspiration and action plan. We trained all managers in unconscious bias last year, and we will continue to do that. We introduced flexible working conditions guidelines to ensure a much more inclusive workplace. Then we made sure that last year and going forward that all senior positions will be posted openly so everyone gets a chance to apply for this. And then we also made new guidelines that will support more inclusive recruitment and also talent management processes. Then as a new thing, we did the gender and equal pay gap assessment, and we did identify, as Emily said, it's a really challenging task. However, we have a really, really talented department called Total Rewards, and they supported us in doing this. And we did identify a few locations where there was a few differences in pay level due to gender. And what we did was we naturally made sure to correct them immediately. And this equal pay study, it will be repeated again in 2020 and going forward to ensure our continued focus. So finally, let me just end with the final slide and saying that I think the Corona crisis really shows the potential of business. You can go to the next slide. Yes. And I think one thing that I would never have expected is that something as that people are actually testing for COVID in our labs. I think that's amazing. Another thing that just happened recently was that our executive management sent out a remote work pulse survey, and it showed that we had people were encouraged and the results were very, very positive. So that was great, you know, in this time where people can be maybe a little stressed and don't know what's going to happen. People can be lonely, and some people might have children running around all the time. So that was really encouraging that it was so positive as it was. And I just want to stress and finally say that Novo Nordisk, despite of this period that we're finding ourselves in, we will continue to fight for equality and non-discrimination globally. It's a really, really high priority for us. And it is also a part of our leading a sustainable business strategy. And I really think that if we can mobilize business and authorities and societies as we do it during this global crisis, what can we do if we come together and unite and fight for equality and discrimination, non-discrimination naturally? I really, really think if we can do this and work and collaborate as we do right now, then I'm sure that we have something great coming for this area as well. Please always feel free to reach out to me in case you have anything you would like to have further elaborated, or if there are some things you think we could do or improve or whatever. We are very open-minded, and we just want to continue to improve what we're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. A virtual applause. Thank you very much for this short introduction to the work that you are doing together with your team. I take away a few elements already. A strong involvement and buy-in of both management and workers that are critical to keep this process ongoing. You discussed a lot of the systems and policies that are in place and that you are following and that are continuously adjusted to adapt to the context, and then of course the access to grievance mechanism. Once again, thanks a lot, Maria. And for time reasons, I would like to hand already over to Silvia Sherry from Bending Spoons, which is an Italian high-tech company, which was awarded the title of Best Place to Work for Women and Best Place to Work for Millennials in Italy. It sounds very attractive. Sylvia, thank you also for being with us in this webinar, and the floor is yours. Please let us know, what does it mean, the best place to work for women?
Thank you, Carl. First of all, I actually want to give a bit of an overview of what the company is like. Bending Spoons is a software house. We develop mobile apps for the final user. We are a team of a little more than 140 people. We are based in Milan, and half of our team is made of software developers. We are honestly a bit obsessive with finding the right talent. We are very selective, and that's because we do believe that people are our biggest asset. What I'm going to try to do today is give you a sense, an example of how gender equality and non-discrimination can really help even a smaller company like us. In my next slide, I actually tried to outline how non-discrimination policies really help in what we do. It goes without saying that they are very aligned with our company objective. Bending Spoon's objective is to build one of the most amazing companies possible and to have a positive impact on society. And you can't really do that if you are discriminating half of the world population. But it's also important in terms of innovation. Innovation is at the core of everything we do. We operate in a very competitive environment, and we need to constantly innovate and find new solutions to old problems, or new problems sometimes. And the kind of different points of view, the kind of different approaches to problems that having a gender equal team can provide is really important to be successful in our field. It's also important because we have a user base that is global and equally more or less divided between male and females. So having both in our team can help us address the needs of all our user base. Finally, non-discrimination is fundamental when it comes to acquiring and retaining the right talent. And about this, I want to go into a bit more detail. In the next slide, I have outlined some practical initiatives that we have taken in two verticals. The disclaimer here is that we never really set out to create policies that benefit women especially. What we try to do is rather create policies that are fair for everybody. But of course, when you work towards fairness, people that are more fragile or more in need are those that benefit the most out of it. And so, for example, when it comes to our salary is structured in tiers, and every tier is anchored to the kind of role you are hired for. This structure takes negotiation out of the equation when it comes to making a job offer. We decided to exclude negotiation because we think that people should be paid for what they are worth rather than what they ask for. So it's just fair. But of course, it benefits the most the kind of people that struggle with the negotiation and being assertive. And that kind of people is generally women. So it's a huge benefit for them. And it's a bit of the same when it comes to our remote work or flexible schedule policies. They are there because we think that people should be able to work where they want and when they can. But it's a huge benefit, especially for women, especially if they are caring for younger children or older parents. The only time I feel we really focused on women specifically has been on the side of talent attraction. And here I want to discuss two things mostly. One is communication. We are in tech, we are a company of software developers, so our brand is not always the most female friendly. The way we tried to work around this was to retune our communication to be as gender neutral as possible, especially when it comes to job offers and to outreach to candidates or potential candidates. Online, there are a plethora of free-to-use tools that help you assess the language you're using. The way you do it is basically you feed them your job ad and they highlight the words that are a bit more male-oriented or can alienate a female public. And by using them, we were able to attract a lot of more females, even in the STEM field, which is historically a particularly difficult one when it comes to female participation. To make sure that the people we attract are also assessed fairly, we try to train all the people involved in the evaluation and assessment of candidates to make sure that they are aware of both bias and social constructs. And about this, I want to go a bit more into detail because it's really interesting, I feel. In the next slide, I added an excerpt of a great book, which title is Invisible Women. I think that many of the points that Emily covered before are actually also covered in this book. It's an interesting read, really. It discusses how lack of gender disaggregated data impacts the design of public or work-related policies. But an excerpt that really resonated with me was this one, because it hit something that we were doing very wrong. We believe in assessments that are as objective as possible. And so, for example, when we look for talent in the field of computer engineering or computer programming, we started by mapping the internal talent and the talent in other companies. And we look for commonalities among all the people that were very talented. And based on those commonalities, we designed our recruiting process. What we failed to notice is that most of the talented people are males because the field is male-dominated. And by failing to realize this, we ended up evaluating passion by asking candidates how they invest their free time. And when they invested their free time, most or all of it, working on personal projects or investigating the field to explore new technologies, then we consider this as a proxy of great passion. This book helped us realize that these behaviors are also very much male. Female candidates express their passion differently. They don't tend to sacrifice their social life to be so obsessive about something. And by focusing our assessment of passion this way, we were excluding them. What we did was try to redesign our process to be not only objective, but also gender neutral. So what we do now is that instead of limiting our question to how they use their free time, which we still ask because it's an interesting and valuable data point, we also investigate how they approach self-improvement and continuous learning. We found that continuous learning is especially gender neutral because the desire to keep on learning and improve is equally widespread across males and females. And by focusing on that, we were able to identify talent among females that would have probably failed if we had stuck with the previous version of the assessment. Now, we are by far not done promoting gender equality. In the next slide, I added some numbers that can give you a sense of where we are at the moment. Our female representation in the team is a bit above average when it comes to the European threshold, both in terms of overall team and leadership roles, but we're not quite where we would like to be. We're still working on that. I think that I learned a thing or two during this workshop that will probably help improve these numbers. But what we are particularly proud of course, is our retention rates. Now, our team is very young. We are 28 average as age. So we know that the hardest challenges are still in front of us. But so far, the complete retention of women, especially women that became mothers, seems encouraging. The interesting part about this is that the same policies that helped us retain talent proved to be really helpful in the current situation of emergency for the COVID. Now, in the next and final slide, I put together the core points that helped us respond quickly and effectively to the emergency. Now, the fact that we were already used at working remotely and with a flexible schedule helped us pivot to full remote quickly. It helped keep our productivity unvaried, but it wasn't enough by its own in any way. What really helped, we feel, was the policy of free and open communication that we have. This is not a policy per se, because it's not something that you can discipline. It is something that you build by building trust, of course, but by giving everybody a voice and by letting people know that you can have issues and you should discuss them with your team leads, we were able to identify specific needs very early on. This has been the case for many women and many parents in general. Being in lockdown with a kid is very difficult, and especially when you have to have a meeting and you might be stressed because you don't want your kids to pop up in the monitor or scream while you're talking. What we did was collecting all these grievances and simply open a channel of communication. We let people know that it was okay, that we didn't expect them to be childless if they had children. It was okay, and they could work on having different ways of participating to meetings, for example, if they felt uncomfortable. But mostly it has been a matter of being supportive emotionally. And we feel that helped a lot. Now, we know that most of the work is still to be done, but we feel that these simple measures, or at least the strong foundations that we would like to keep on building upon to ensure that non-discrimination is truly ingrained in the company. That's it.
Thank you, Silvia. Thank you very much for this concise presentation on the work that Bending Spoons is doing. Company, best place to work for millennials and best place to work for women. Thank you, Audrey, also for the input that has been provided. I don't know if the people can see, the participants can see the chat box, but a lot of questions are coming in on the different presentations. Of course, we already are running over time. It's already 5:20 at least here in Italy, and we would still like to give the floor to our colleague Benedetta. So we picked just a few questions. Apologies already for those questions that we cannot respond right at this moment. But one question that struck our attention is a question for Maria, but Silvia, you can also give it a go, but a question specifically for Maria from Nordisk was domestic violence is a rising problem during COVID-19. What kind of suggestions do you have for employers to help their employees who are at risk? So basically, Maria, how are you managing this issue of domestic violence in your global operation, which covers 43,000 employees, if I was correct? Huh? Maria.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what we're doing is actually a lot of us are already back to work, so to say. But what we're actually doing at the moment is we're working together with our health and safety unit and our diversity and inclusion unit. And then we have made a video on corona bias. And it is a lot about harassment and all of those things. So yeah, that's what we're doing. I don't know if I can be more precise about the other part that you are.
Prevention, yes.
Yeah, I think that would be more our health and safety unit that is over that part.
On this issue of prevention, yes. Emily, one question is, based upon your knowledge of international labor standards, how can we move forward to accommodate workers with family responsibilities? It is a big discussion, at least in many countries now that are faced with the COVID crisis, merging family responsibilities with work responsibilities at home. Could you share your views and your opinion on that, and the ones that are also guided by international labor standards?
Sure. First of all, I would like to remind people that both women and men can have family responsibilities. So it's important that you reach out to everyone and not just women assuming that they have family responsibilities. But within that, I'm sure all of you are feeling it right now as well. One of the biggest issues is being flexible about working time to be able to allow workers with family responsibilities, be they women or men, to help support their children if they need work with school or to do other tasks around the house. And that may mean having adjusted work hours and flexible in the sense not just when you do the work, but how you might spread out the work. And having trust in your men and women colleagues to actually carry out the work that they're supposed to be doing without constantly monitoring, hey, you're not at your computer right now, where were you, why aren't you working, sort of thing, recognizing they're juggling many things at once. Also, maybe lowering your expectations of exactly how much it's realistic to expect them to get done as compared to when they are kid-free, without trying to cook and do laundry at the same time, etc., at the office. So really flexible there. The other challenge is appreciating that your colleagues with family responsibilities, they may not always be able to participate at particular times for meetings. So maybe be flexible on how mandatory the meetings are, how often you have Zoom or Skype meetings, and tuning in with people and checking first if it's okay, rather than just assuming that it works for everyone when it might not. And last but not least, there are some challenges families are having around a lot of people on the computer at the same time. It may be a not very wealthy household that has to share one computer amongst 4, 5, 6 people, all trying to work, do schoolwork, etc., and being a bit more gentle with your employees and helping them, maybe lending them a computer if need be, etc., to get them the equipment that they need without just assuming, hey, you know, they should have a computer, they should, you know, and not realizing that they have other computer or equipment needs or bandwidth needs that they're trying to accommodate at the same time.
Thank you very much, Emily. And I also would like to thank Maria and Sylvia for the input that has been provided to the short presentations. As such, it's a webinar. We only have 1 hour and 13 minutes. And there are a lot of questions still coming in. So I would still refer to the resources that are made available through the ILO.org/business, the ILO's help desk for business, or assistance at ILO.org. To conclude this webinar, I would like to give the floor, the final word, as a matter of fact, to Benedetta Magri, who will present a specific tool that has been developed within the framework of this program. It's called WeTest tool. It's a self-diagnostic tool, but I leave it to Benedetta to explain herself. Benedetta, please.
So good day, good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Lovely to be here. I'll be very quick because I know I have like possibly 3 minutes. So I think that what I'll do, I'll just show you this tool. And then I think we'll have a way to present it more in detail, maybe in another webinar, because I hear that we are planning actually, and I'd like also to tell everyone, we are planning to run a few more of these webinars on different topics. So in terms of tools, so we're going to dedicate some more time. I just wanted to show you, can you hear me well? I hope. This website, which is now online, you will receive the link, and which comprises a number of tools. The idea behind it is that we are trying to use a methodology which was used with many thousands of companies, small and medium companies across the world, by the ILO, and particularly by a project called SCORE, which means Sustainable, Competitive and Responsible Enterprises. So it's a productivity program that has integrated a tool to help companies understand the potential, the productivity potential of gender equality. So the tool is a self-assessment tool that you can take. Maybe we can go ahead and just show very, very quickly what it looks like. You can take it and you're going to be asked a few questions, like not a few, just quite a good number of questions. It's about 50 questions, but it won't take very long because you can take it as many times as you like. The idea being that you're really going through these questions to start reflecting on your practices in relation to 5 areas: recruitment, participation and leadership, pay conditions, what the work climate is like, and work-life balance within your company. And once you've done it, you'll get results. And maybe we can go ahead and I can show you the kind of results you'll get. I wanted to show you some examples, but we're going to do it. So you will have results in relation to your, let's say, capacity to promote inclusive hiring practices. What's your situation in relation to equity? This was a test I made, and I was really, really terrible in terms of leadership and participation in voice equity. Paying conditions, work climate. So how are you able to promote respectful working relations, including, of course, prevention of harassment and violence, and work-life balance? And you get a score, an overall score out of 500, and then also a score for each of these different, let's say, areas of self-assessment. Related to that, once you have made a reflection on that, you also get some kind of feedback on how good or less good or really terrible you are. You keep it for yourself. This is all obviously confidential. You're not even asked to give your name if you don't want to. If you want to, at the end of it, you can give us a few information, which is important for us to understand, because we are creating some benchmarking tool. So if you, as soon as we are going to send you the link, we'd be very, very happy to see you trying it out so we can build this benchmark. And so you see, the website comprises this test. According to the results, you'll be able also to choose some very practical and I would say, yes, practical and quite short modules on various areas in relation to gender equality. They're not online yet, but they will be soon. And you can also ask for support through what we call We Mentor, which is basically a contact with Emily and her team in the ILO Help Desk for Business. We will then be able to channel your request and your needs to the specific people you may be able to help. So I don't want to take any more time. So the idea is that once we will have, hopefully many companies trying out the tool, we will also have an idea of how we are doing globally. And the tool, as I say, the test that I said, can be taken as many times as you like. And I think that's the idea, is really to monitor yourself and self-assess yourself. Those who know the ILO and the ITC ILO know that the whole idea is not to assess or audit or give a judgment, but really to help people think how to make the best. And I think we've heard a lot about this today. It was great to hear companies really making a clear point on the necessity to be fair and equitable and really inclusive to survive and to be sustainable, particularly in this particular moment. So we look forward to having you again in the next webinars, and to seeing you come and access the test and give us as much feedback as you like, because we love to hear from you all. So thank you very much for your participation. Carla, I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Benedetta. As we said, this was just a teaser of the WeTest tool, which will be coming online very soon. It's separated. Excuse me?
And that's just something I forgot to say, because I see the question. The tool is totally free. and there's no fee involved in any of the part of the website, and including the training tools. They're going to be self-learning modules, and everything is free because this is financed by the European Union, to whom I think we're going to say thank you. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Benedetta. And a separate webinar will be organized around this tool if you would like to know more. So, Benedetta, Maria, Sylvia, and Emily, thank you once again for your time and the effort that you put in your presentations and your actual participation to your webinar. This is very much appreciated by us. To the audience, which you were with a large number of active participants, I can see in the chat box, I saw over 300 active participants in the audience. Thank you very much also for your time. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us, to the panelists, to the ILO, in case you have specific questions. Again, assistance@ilo.org. Please also have a look. I see a lot of questions coming in on training and capacity development on this topic. Have a look also at the ITC-ILO.org website. Given the current COVID crisis, we are undergoing a significant digital transformation, and I am sure you will find something to your liking on ITC-ILO.org website, with also a lot of free courses that we are offering. Finally, tomorrow, before the 1st of May, Thursday evening, there will be another webinar, same time, 10 a.m. EDT, on gender equality and COVID-19. What is it that the private sector can do? So you are invited also to attend tomorrow's webinar. So to conclude, thank you very much, and I hope you picked up something from this webinar, and I wish you a nice day or a nice evening, depending on where you are. Thank you.